Where else could we begin other than the 2024 TELUS Canadian Championship? We now know 3 of the 4 semifinalists after a wild night last night with lightning and thunder and rain and a big cup set. We'll touch on that in a moment. Let's go through this chronologically, gentlemen, if you will recall, because it feels like we've done something of a marathon on One Soccer these past couple of days. Toronto FC opened up the Leg 2 fixtures by beating CF Saint Laurent by 8-1. Rickson Aries Steele had the memorable moment for the Quebecers, but it's TFC advancing 11-1 on aggregate. That match was followed by another thriller at BC Place. Cavalry actually goes and beats Vancouver Whitecaps on their home turf by 1-0, but do not advance thanks to the away goals rule. And then last night, the crown jewel of the tournament thus far, Bobby Smirniotis and this brilliantly organized Forge team comes into their game at Stade Saputo, a goal apiece. They know that they need to score in the game. It takes them just 13 minutes. The exquisite Daniel Parra does it again. 13 minutes into the game, he blasts a shot off Brez's gloves. And then an insurance marker from Kwesi Poku answering the question, is he a number 9? We found out that last night he certainly was. They would hang on for a huge second half push from CF Montreal, where things are really not going particularly well for that side. So plenty to get into. Let's start with the match that I just discussed, Jordan Wilson. We're not going to take anything away from Forge because they had to go on and win that performance themselves. But would you say, if you had to pick a side, that win was a result of Forge's brilliance or CF Montreal in absolute and utter shambles?
This is Forge and Forge's brilliance. That's all I really want to talk about. Look, the first leg, you see a match where Forge take the sting out of the game at the right moments. Possession, they're composed, players wanting to get on the ball. It's different when you play a big game. When you're playing in the CPL, you're playing against competition that's comfortable. Everyone can get on the ball. You can lose it, you'll ask for it again because you know the stakes. In this type of match where you know it's knockout football, sometimes a mistake happens and you're like, ooh, I don't know if I should get on it. There wasn't a single Forge player that didn't have bravery in the first leg, but specifically last night. Even if they made a mistake, even if they lost it, they were still ready to go on and redeem themselves. Forge has been organized for a very long time, but I haven't seen a performance like that from a CPL side, but we'll just focus on Forge like last night in terms of dedicated, the unity. Of course, they have the talent, but they wanted it more, and they showed it throughout the match. First half, getting those goals, you see right here, Poku, like what it means for the 21-year-old to put that one in for 2-0. But even in the second half, rolling up their sleeves, getting blocks in. Kalongo was huge. Everyone was committed. You had Borges. I didn't know Borges like defended the way that he did. He was locked in, defending, throwing his little body about. And this is what Bobby Smirniotis and Forge and the Hammers, this is what they're about now. They want to go far in this tournament. Of course, you could talk about CF Montreal not being there, but for me, even if they could have changed the momentum for CF Montreal, Forge did not allow them, and that's a big thing for me as well. They said, yo, this is our time, this is our moment, and they took it, so full credit to them.
Gareth Wheeler.
2 wins in 2 nights by Canadian Premier League sides over MLS clubs. I mean, that speaks volumes. And the fact that, listen, a team playing poorly just doesn't mean that you hand the game, the match, the set to the other team. They need to go out and earn it, especially when there's quite a big disparity between resources and money that's put into those teams. Forge earned it. There's no question in my mind. It's been coming. Anyone that wants to downplay the performance by Forge, you haven't been paying attention about what's been taking place over the last 5 years. This project is a finely tuned machine in Hamilton. They are winners. They've been brought up to be winners. These guys, all they do is continue to improve. New players come in and the standards don't drop. In fact, this is the best start in Forge's young six-year history as a club. And they have the ability to go on and be even better than they've ever been before. That's a scary thought. And that's a scary thought for whoever they play in the next round of this competition as well. They showed they can play in different ways. They can be free-flowing in attack. They were without their preferred first or second choice number 9 to start this game. They played a player in Poku, young player, just hasn't played that role since youth football. And he caused all kinds of problems and ends up scoring the match-winning and the tie-winning goal. Next man up mentality, whether it's a goalkeeper, whether it's a right back, whether it's a left back, whether it's central, but it doesn't matter with this club. And individuals like, the players certainly, but Bobby Smirniotis and what he has built, it's time to start putting some more respect on it. I think that he has respect and credibility amongst most of his peers, but that's not always the context that soccer fans approach things in the Canadian soccer ecosystem. Oftentimes, we downplay or approach things with skepticism more so than anything else. He is a real deal when it comes to being a manager of this club. They're well organized and they deserve full credit for a hard-fought victory in that second leg, their first over an MLS club.
Oliver Platt.
Yeah, not a lot to add to what the guys have already said. Forge did everything right, I think, against a vulnerable team. They targeted the weaknesses that I think have been exposed for CF Montreal in the past few weeks, and it was always going to be a question to see whether Montreal adjusted for this game to try and maybe play a bit more pragmatically and get themselves in the semi-final. I don't think they did that. Forge punished them, particularly that space behind the defensive line was just asking to be attacked all game long. And then I think it was the right decision for Forge in the second half, given the circumstances, to sit back and absorb pressure. I don't think you can do that if it's a 1-goal advantage in the tie. When you've got 3 goals to play with. I think Forge could be comfortable. We may concede 1 here. We're not going to concede 3. And we're going to advance to the semifinals. So all credit to Forge. They continue to show us, how impressive it is what they've built in Hamilton. Got a lot of time for some of the young players that are now coming through. I think there's maybe sometimes a bit of a case with young players that they want a lot very quickly in the CPL. And when it doesn't happen, some frustration can set in. These guys, Kalongo, Duncan, Owalabi Belawu, Poku, they've been on the roster for 2 or 3 seasons now in Hamilton. And it's just starting to come good now. And I think they've worked and waited for that opportunity. That being said, Montreal were awful. The first half performance in particular was absolutely dreadful. I'm not sure what's going on with this team right now. I don't know if the off-field stuff has kind of infected that locker room and the effort levels. You saw on some of the highlights there, Victor Wanyama on the first goal, has got to be better, got to be more aggressive. And I think that was emblematic of the attitude of the entire team in the first half. And while it improved a bit in the second half, it was still, I thought, pretty routine in the end for Forge to sit deep, absorb pressure. Kalongo had to make 2 or 3 good saves, but he wasn't having to stand on his head to secure that result. So all credit to Forge, but some big questions to be asked in Montreal.
And when the semifinal draw takes place during leg 2 of Atletico Ottawa and Pacific next Wednesday, Forge will find out their path. And as Gareth mentions, I don't think anyone's going to want to see Forge's name drawn against them, especially with Eliman Cisse and Nana Mpoma just a few weeks away, depending on how fast that paper can be processed. I don't think they're going to be afraid of absolutely anyone. They truly believe they can win this TELUS Canadian Championship. Let's go back a day to the first quarterfinal, or the first second leg quarterfinal match of the round. Ollie, you and I called that game together, and it was a classic case of everyone was sort of riding the high in the storyline of an incredible showing by CS Saint Laurent at home in Montreal. They bring TFC to Montreal to play at the old Impact venue, and the grass is thick and the supporters are loud and there's smoke and there's fireworks and there's dancing, and the spectacle was incredible. Obviously, when TFC brings CS Saint Laurent to their home turf, we're expecting a different story, especially when we see Lorenzo Insigne's name starting for John Herdman. And it brings up the question about League One Canada teams in this competition, where the one-offs, they can certainly have a special moment, a special performance. But when there's the 2 legs, it becomes a much more daunting task, especially when they're up against an MLS side. So having called the game, would you say that 8-1 drubbing was a joy to watch or hard to watch?
It was better to watch than I thought it would be. I think in a lot of teams in that situation would have been very defensive and probably would have lost 5 or 6-0 anyway. And that's never fun to watch. It becomes a bit of a training session. Saint Laurent were different to a lot of teams I've seen in that situation, in that they just kept flying forwards and they clearly wanted a goal. They got it and they absolutely deserved it when it did come. Obviously, the other side to that is that you end up conceding 8 and 11 in the tie on aggregate, which looks pretty ugly. I don't think they'll particularly care. They got a chance to go up against Toronto FC. They got a chance to play at BMO Field. They scored a goal at BMO Fields. A lot of individual players on that team showed what they could do. So, in terms of 1 leg versus 2, I've always kind of preferred one leg in cup competitions, at least in domestic cup competitions. I understand the reasons for doing two, to give, to create more matchups between the Canadian teams at different levels, and that can be beneficial for, teams like Saint Laurent getting this opportunity to play home and away. But this one for me, I didn't find it as hard to watch as maybe it might have been the case for other teams that didn't take the approach that Saint Laurent did.
Gareth.
It was tough to watch when they went down to 10 men. Like you felt for them. Up, the first goal went in, okay. You still want to see a performance. And I love what Nick Rizaghi, their manager, said about what it meant for them. Like, some of these players will never have this opportunity to play against Toronto FC and BMO Field ever again in their entire life. And it was difficult. The one thing I might suggest for this competition, maybe do things like they do in the FA Cup. Well, they did in the FA Cup, like have a replay. If the first leg ends in a draw, then you go back to play in the other team's stadium. I know scheduling is always a massive challenge. It was very difficult for me to watch at times, but I will say this: once that ball went into the back of the net for Saint Laurent, it all seemed worthwhile. Like the celebrations, what it meant in that moment. Then you had the Bernadeschi jersey exchange. But I mean, there was these really, really heartwarming memories that drive home what it's all about. So although it was a struggle to get there, once we did get there, then I'm happy that it all played out the way that it did.
It's a great show too. And you think about the fact that if Luka Gavrin wasn't as dialed in as he was, maybe there would be a few more goals or an earlier goal from Saint Laurent, who deserve absolutely every ounce of the praise that they are getting for what they did in this tournament.
First leg was awesome.
Unfortunately,
First leg was unbelievable.
It truly was. I think it's one of the sports stories in Canada to this point in the year, and it will be one of the best soccer stories of the season in this nation for sure. Jordan, immediately following that game, we went to BC Place, and it was Cavalry trying to repeat history against the Vancouver Whitecaps, and they threw everything and the kitchen sink at Vanni Sartini's side, which was heavily rotated, as we would have expected from an MLS group anticipating Lionel Messi in just a few days. But in the end, Cavalry come up a little bit short of that second goal. I, of course, want you to weigh in. But before we get there, I actually want to revisit the words of Vanni Sartini after the match, where he felt the performance was so shameful that he actually had to address his supporters. Let's listen.
I think we need to apologize to our fans for our performance that was shameful in the second half. The first half we tried at least, and the second half it was like I gotta be honest with you guys, there's very few things to comment about, because when one team tries to win them and the other team is very casual, that's a recipe for the game that happened here, because I don't want to say we could have scored the tie, whatever, but I really didn't like the attitude of the team, and that's on me. That's 100% on me, because when it's not one or two or players, but it's 11 players that they play the last 15 minutes like they don't know that if they score another goal, we get eliminated, and we were jogging on the field like it was it means that my message during the week hasn't passed, and when that happened, I have to take full responsibility. So I think it was by far the lowest point of my career here at the Whitecaps today.
And there were more quotes from Vanni Sartini that certainly circulated across social media and footballing circles. When asked about who was good tonight, he had said, and I'm paraphrasing, nobody, and that I don't know who's going to start against Inter Miami at the weekend. So obviously, Jordan, we know Vanni Sartini, a man who is very accountable, very transparent. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he was heartbroken after that defeat, despite going through to the semifinals. Do you think he needed to apologize, or should Vancouver just be satisfied to tick off the box and move on to the semifinal round?
Well, I think he needed to apologize. I think he's one of those guys that he wants effort from his squad. It wasn't present on the day. So maybe you feel an obligation to say that. Is that on Vanni? I mean, nowadays people talk about managers and conducting a team, but I think that's on the players. But what I want to shift my focus to a little bit is Cavalry and the effort that they put in. because even speaking to Tommy Wilden Jr., and we go on about the CPL coaches that are doing a great job, but I wonder if like MLS depth is not as strong as CPL strength. Like these guys for Cavalry were locked in and wanted it. And probably from that moment, Wheels, right? The miss from Akio, but then start to gain a little bit of confidence after this goal. And everything just seemed to be a bit urgent, right? Instead of jogging out to a man, it was a full-on sprint, head down. And then Cavalry just had that momentum. We can't deny the talent that's in the CPL and the talent that Cavalry plays even on the day. But what got them to this moment and maybe that second goal marginally, great touch, but marginally by Daly there, is the effort, the willingness to put your body on the line, the willingness to run the extra mile. And I'm starting to see a gap with MLS. You can talk about the budget and the million, but if CPL clubs can remain and have that with the talent that they have, on any given day, they can compete. Of course, if you have an MLS side and they have all their players fresh, it will be tough. But I'm proud of both CPL teams, specifically Cavalry in this moment, because they took care of that. They made a situation for Vanni Sartini to look at his guys and say they wanted it more. If you were to pick players on that day who he would want to start on the weekend, some of them would be out wearing a Cavalry jersey. That means a lot. That means a lot when you're looking at a game with a budget so different. So for me, there's a lot of immense pride, even just playing in this league, but knowing the guys that went out and did business in midweek.
Yeah, and by Sartini saying that, I don't think that was a sign of disrespect to Cavalry. It's about the expectations of a club that many people think should be competing up near the top of the Western Conference. Golden White came on and they still couldn't score a goal at home. You're right about Cavalry. I think that there's a little bit of an issue in Major League Soccer right now. There's 29 teams, which waters down the player pool to a certain degree, but not just that 29 teams, but there's going to be only one team that wins the Supporters Shield and one team that goes on and wins the MLS Cup. Like there's a lot of teams where there's no relegation. Obviously, there's a lot of games that kind of just all blend into one another. And I think in that game, like they showed a lack of urgency. And I think that that's problematic. Like in the CPL, there's no promotion relegation, but these players are hungry to go on and prove that they can take their career forward. And there's the threat and danger of them falling into the professional ranks completely. And I think that urgency played itself out on the field. Like Dan Klomp is a player that should be playing at the next level. What an unbelievable game that guy. He was the best player on the field. Like his tenacity, the tackles, his vision, his distribution, everything. Trafford and Daly in the middle of the park. They ran and ran and ran, and they ran some more. Montgomery, like I just feel like this, despite these issues facing Major League Soccer, this is more praise that needs to be put on to these Canadian Premier League sides and setups. Again, Tommy Wilden Jr. has built this project where they've seen players and coaches and executives move on to bigger jobs and bigger roles as well. But meanwhile, they still maintain a standard where they go on and compete for the league every year and compete with MLS sides and for the Canadian Championship every year as well. So what a performance. I'm gutted for them. And Sartini even said it, like the away goals rule. There's a reason why UEFA binned it. And perhaps that's an idea for this competition going forward. Just incredible. Cavalry beat the Whitecaps twice now since 2019. They've only lost once, and it was at home in 2-1. Like, I don't know, man. Like, things are changing, and people are taking notice.
Absolutely brilliant. These first three quarterfinals. We have one remaining that will be next Wednesday, May the 29th. A 7 p.m. Pacific time start as Pacific hosts Atletico Ottawa. And a reminder, the draw for the semifinal will take place at halftime. Gareth, are you going to be the match draw conductor person? I need to know.
I think that we have a Canadian soccer legend coming into studio. The one, the only Richard Scott, the draw master himself. So my hands are clean.
A little tease for the draw next week.